Welcome to the Academic Writing Amplified podcast. On this podcast, we believe that the culture of academia needs to change radically. Women and non-binary people are revolutionizing academia within institutions that were not built for us. If you're ready to reject the culture of overwork, kick guilt and overwhelm to the curb, and amplify your voice to make a real impact on your field without breaking down or burning out, you're in the right place. With our team of experienced writing coaches as co-hosts, we'll share insights and talk to inspiring guests to bring you the practical strategies, systems, and mindset shifts you need to find time to write, publish work you love, and design your career on your terms. And it all starts with writing. Let's go. Hello, and welcome to the Academic Writing Amplified podcast. Today, I am recycling a podcast episode for you as part of our series about emotions and writing. So basically, I went through my back catalog of over 250 almost episodes of the podcast, and I identified some that were really about writing and emotions. And so I have those for you coming up for the next little while, because I wanted to make sure that in this series on writing and emotions, we get to all the good stuff. So I would love for you to recommend this podcast and this podcast series to someone who you think needs it. I hope that as you listen to these recycled episodes, that you feel inspiration. All right, have a great day. Enjoy this episode. Ever since it became popular to use overwhelm as a noun, it really seems like the perfect way to describe the state that we are in academia for most of the time. And if you've been listening to my podcast or if you've been following my blog, then you know that I talk a lot about the fact that our jobs as professors are built to pull us in different directions. Just the holy trio of teaching, research, and service naturally create a pull in our academic life that makes it really hard to concentrate on just one thing and really hard to move projects from start to finish without simultaneously working on multiple projects. In fact, simultaneously working on multiple projects is kind of the default nature of what we do. So I always say we need to be project managers, but we also need to learn how to deal with these competing pulls on our time and competing priorities all the time. So I would say that the default state of our semester is feeling overwhelmed. And that usually happens, that gets worse and worse as the semester continues. So right now, if you're listening in real time, you're probably around week 12, 13, 14 of your semester. And we are starting to get really into the thick of the last throes of the semester and preparing for our final exam time or end of semester grading time. So this is when overwhelm really starts to kick in. And here's some characteristics of overwhelm to see if you are in this state right now. So one of the things that happens is that you feel like you have so much to do, you can no longer see the difference of importance in projects. So you can't judge, or you get worse at judging what's really important to do versus what is just simply urgent, because it just looks like a sea of things that need to be done right now. So that is one of the characteristics of overwhelm. And what happens when we feel that way is that it's really hard to make a choice as to what project we want to take action on. So we get paralyzed. And that happens to us with our writing a lot of the time. So not only do we have these competing priorities, so priorities competing with our writing, but we also have multiple writing projects competing with each other. And so that state of overwhelm and kind of paralysis is really, really detrimental to writing. At the end of the day, writing is creation, right? And it is creative. And so feelings like guilt and overwhelm really can stamp down that creativity and that urge to create, because instead, when we're talking about overwhelm specifically, all you have is kind of an urge to put out fires, and that is not conducive to your writing practice. So today I want to talk about ways that you can work through overwhelm, and then what to do when you're feeling overwhelmed and your writing is kind of sitting there stalled out. So how to work through writing overwhelm as well as general overwhelm. All right, so the best technique that I can talk to you about for combating overwhelm is the just 3 things method. And this is a method where you really boil down your goals and even just, I would say, your tasks for the day into just 3 things that need to get done. And if you accomplish those 3 things, then you can move on with your day. Everything else you do is extra, and you feel really good because you've moved the needle, right? And you've checked 3 things off your list. So here's how you use this method. The best way to use it, especially if you're feeling overwhelmed, is to choose your 3 things the night before. Okay. So if you're thinking about what you're going to get done on Tuesday, the best time to do that thinking is not on Tuesday. It's on Monday night or Monday, in what I always say, the last 10 or 15 minutes before you go home from work. So sometimes when, especially if we have to stand up and run and pick up kids or have a certain time that we have to be home, then a lot of times those last 10 or 15 minutes can sometimes be a little burst of oh, I just want to finish this thing before I leave. But I'm encouraging you, especially during times when you feel overwhelmed, to instead make the last 10 or 15 minutes of your day a planning session for the next day. And in the overwhelm time, what I want you to do is just think about 3 things that you're going to get done the following day, and I want you to write them down. Now, here's how you choose the 3 things. You have to be really careful that the 3 things you choose are tasks and not projects. The difference between projects and tasks is the size of the thing. A project is something like grade all 35 assignments, right? That's a project. A task might be grade 3 assignments, to put it in perspective for this grading season that you might be in right now. Or, the way I often talk about writing tasks and projects is that a writing project is something like write an academic article or write a book chapter. And then those projects have tasks underneath of them, right? Write the introduction, read for the lit review, write the lit review. And you can break down your tasks into different levels of granularity, right? So what I want you to do though, for when you are implementing the just 3 things method, is make your 3 tasks 3 things that you feel certain that you'll be able to accomplish in one day. So write the introduction is probably not a good thing to write on for one of your 3 things if you are in overwhelm mode and you're trying to sort through the projects. That's a little too big. Instead, for example, if you're going to choose something related to grading, say okay, I'm going to grade 3 essays or 5 essays or some kind of small number as one of your 3 things. An additional 3 thing might be email this person about this thing, right? That's the level that I'm talking about. So what I want you to do is the night before, you're going to sit down, or night before, I actually don't want you to do this at home. I want you to do this in the last 10 minutes that you're in your office. And I want you to select 3 things from your list. Now, for some people, it helps, if you're feeling overwhelmed, it helps to do a big brain dump of activities. So that's another technique besides the just 3 things. The second technique I'm offering you for working through overwhelm is to sit down and make a giant list of all the things. Now, I like to do a list like this on my phone because that way,
in the middle of the night, if I wake up, my phone has my alarm on it, so it's always kind of next to the bed. If I wake up in the middle of the night and I'm like, oh, I forgot that thing, I can add it to the list. And I do this in Trello, but you can do it in notes or whatever. You just want someplace to collect up all those things that you remember. All right. And then that is going to be like a big unorganized brain dump of things that are pressing for you. Right. So that's going to be like a big list of unprioritized tasks and things that you need to do, things that are weighing on you. Now, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that list. So from that list, you can pull your 3 things, right? And I actually wouldn't spend a lot of time like prioritizing that list or starring things or anything like that. If you're feeling overwhelmed, I would just make the list and have it there as like a repository or a task bucket, as sometimes I call it, right? Things you know that you need to get done. And then in the last 10 minutes before you leave, you choose 3 things from that list for the next day. Now, I want to talk to you a little bit more about that list. I'm sure that I'm not the only person listening to this podcast who has found a list like this in her office, right? Like that I've made it on a piece of paper and it's somewhere, or even digitally, like in my notes app, I find these lists that I've made. And there are things on the list that never got done. So I want to talk to you about those things. I want to say that there are some things that you feel are pressing right now because you're overwhelmed and you can't see the difference in importance at the moment, or like everything feels pressing. And so you're having trouble sifting through. But actually there are some things on that list that will never get done, and that's okay. There are things that you might be asked to do by other people that you have put on yourself. And at the moment they seemed important and maybe urgent. But in the end, they won't get done and everything will still go on, and you won't lose your job and you won't fail as a scholar, and everything will be fine. So I just want to encourage you, when you are pulling your 3 things from the list to do for the next day, I want you to know that the goal is actually not to do everything on the list. The goal is to use the just 3 things method to sort in that moment, right? In the moment at the end of the day, when you're getting ready for the next day, when you're planning your 3 things for the next day, what you're going to naturally do is like pull in a combination of things that are easy to do. So like low hanging fruit things, because you definitely want to have like at least one of those in your 3. So you're like 100% sure that that's going to get done. And then you will be making kind of like an importance judgment as you pull those 3 things. And just know that the semester will end and some of those things will not be done and they were never meant to be done. And that's okay. So checking 100% of the things off the list is actually not the goal. The goal is to use your intuition and to use your self-confidence to choose 3 things each day from now until the end of the semester and be super happy when you do those 3 things. So those are some techniques for working through overwhelm when you're looking out on all your tasks and you're just feeling like paralyzed because you don't know what to do next. You use the just 3 things technique to give yourself a plan about what to do next. Now, let's talk specifically about writing and overwhelm. So as I mentioned at the top of this episode, overwhelm is one of the things that will kind of stamp down any writing spark that you have. So what we're always going to do when we feel overwhelmed about writing is go back to your tiger time. Now, in episode 2, I give all the details of what tiger time is, but I'm just going to give you like the 2 or 3 sentence version. So tiger time is the time of day where you feel the most energized and focused. So please notice that I didn't say that you feel energized and focused. I said the most energized and focused. So compared to other moments of the day, this is your best time. And the way that you know that time. I give you a method for figuring that out in episode 2. But basically, it's the time of day when things just flow. You can get a lot more done in a shorter period of time because you're kind of like in it, words flow out. If you're writing during that time, things get checked off the list. For me, this is not exactly first thing in the morning, but it's like 8 o'clock to 11 o'clock a.m. And I do the bulk of my work actually during those hours. And so even if I have 8 hours in the day to work, it's those 3 hours where the majority of the work gets done. And I've actually done pretty detailed time studies of myself to figure this out. And it's pretty consistent that those are the hours that I need to hit to be my most productive. That doesn't mean though, and with the Tiger Time method, we do not advocate hours and hours and hours of writing per day. What the Tiger Time method is that you only write during your Tiger Time. And so you give yourself permission to not write at the other times. So you don't write when you're exhausted. You don't write when you're distracted. If you're feeling exhausted or distracted, you make the conscious decision not to write. And all of this is part of building a positive relationship with your writing, which I also talk about in another podcast episode. So how Tiger Time relates to Overwhelm is that it always gives you a place to like turn back to, or a way to turn back to your writing that keeps it positive and productive. So if right now you're feeling overwhelmed, the technique that I want you to use is to write just 1 hour a week during your Tiger Time. Go back to that. That is your baseline. That's where we start. When we're starting to implement the Tiger Time method, we start with 1 to 2 hours a day, 1 to 2 days a week. So at this moment of the semester, and if you're feeling really overwhelmed, then what you're going to do is pull that all the way back down to 1 hour a day, 1 day a week. And you might be thinking like, that's not going to get me anywhere, but it will. Because when you're writing during your Tiger Time, you are more productive. It's not just writing for the sake of writing. You're actually going to put out more. It's going to feel better, and you're going to have to edit out less. So you actually get done in a smaller amount of time. So the important thing for Overwhelm in general is that you back things up to kind of their minimal state, right? Just 3 things need to get done today. Just 1 hour needs to go towards my writing this week. You back it all the way up. Because if you don't do that, then what happens is you're operating at this level of cortisol, right? That's kind of coursing through your veins and making you unable to make decisions about the many, many tasks that are in front of you. And I would actually suggest that you have the same that perhaps you have the same number of tasks on your list all year long. But because of the semester's ebb and flow, because of other things happening in your life, sometimes that number of tasks is overwhelming and sometimes it's not as overwhelming. So the techniques that I talked about today are ones to get you through this overwhelming time. A few things just to highlight. Make sure that when you choose your just 3 things, that they are doable things. And if you go a couple of days where one of the just 3 things stays on your list until the next day, so it like rolls over a couple of times, that's a signal that that thing either needs to be broken down into smaller chunks, or I want you to really think about whether that thing needed to be one of the 3 things or not. And then I encourage you, in terms of overwhelm and writing, just back down to 1 hour a week during your Tiger Time until the semester is over. And feel really happy when you do that. Now, I just want to mention a couple of other episodes that you might want to listen to. So if this is the first time you've listened to my podcast, I have a lot of goodies in the first season. And one of them that relates to writing overwhelm is the episode about breaking projects into tasks. That really digs into how you take a writing project and break it into tasks. Because the other problem, right? Like, let's say you get to your tiger time and you're sitting there with your hour. The other problem is where to start. And if you go back and listen to that episode, then that will give you some hints about how to break a project down into tasks and how to pick the writing task that you're going to sit down and do.
Thank you so much for spending your valuable time supporting yourself and your writing by listening to this episode. If you like what you heard today, the best way to say thank you is to hop on over to Apple iTunes and write an honest review. The more reviews, the more amazing academic women and non-binary people will find this podcast. So go write one now.